It may only be the preseason, baby, but we have football. And what happened in week 1 of the preseason that we should be keeping an eye out on? What players made an impact in week 1 that could end up rolling over that impact to the regular season? Who are some of those must-watch risers that maybe we aren't jumping on board with just yet, but their performance from week 1 definitely warrants us keeping an eye on them? Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Today's video, I'm going to be diving into some of the top performances from week 1 of the preseason to see if there's any risers that we need to be keeping an eye on that could end up making an impact for their team this season. And while none of these guys may have earned substantial playing time as of yet, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be keeping an eye on them for several reasons. Like Eric Gray from the New York Giants, who had 52 rushing yards on 4 attempts. 46 receiving yards on 4 receptions and 2 touchdowns to go along with it. He definitely made an impact this week against the Detroit Lions. But is he going to be in line to make an impact after Devin Singletary this year? We're going to need to keep an eye on Eric Gray over the next couple of weeks to see if these type of performances continue to be turned out. Right now, Tyrone Tracy still appears to be the number 2 behind Devin Singletary. And the numbers from the snap percentages showed that, because Tyrone Tracy saw more snaps with the ones than what Eric Gray did. But that doesn't mean that Gray isn't going to be a guy that could work his way up to that level at some point. And I'm completely on board with Tyrone Tracy, so I'm not willing to change my mind on him as of yet. I do think he's the more explosive player here. But once again, these are guys that we have to keep an eye on, because if the numbers keep popping up, their team's not going to have any choice but to find some more playing time for them. Braylon Allen may have cemented himself as the number 2 running back behind Breece Hall for the New York Jets this season. And while that's not super glamorous and isn't going to bring a lot of fantasy points to our team, it is super important to note that if he is the handcuff for Breece Hall, he's a guy that we may need to add in all formats. This past week, he looked strong, running for 54 yards on only 6 attempts. And he looks to be the guy, after all the reports in training camp over the last week and a half, that will end up backing up Breece Hall. Especially for those of you that are playing in best ball leagues, you absolutely need to grab Braylon Allen right now if you're drafting Breece Hall. And if you want to get a 2024 fantasy football draft guide for free from us, all you need to do is head on over to our friends at Underdog, download their app, create a new account, and deposit at least $10 using code word headliners. We're going to hook you up with a free draft guide. You're going to get a special pick'em that is almost absolutely guaranteed to hit, that you can utilize right away, and you can start doing some best ball drafts with myself, Jake, and other members of the Headliner Nation crew, because you're also going to get a deposit bonus. So make sure that you take advantage of all that before week 1 gets here, so we can draft some best ball teams together. The Buffalo Bills wide receivers right now look like a little bit of a mess to me, but the one guy that we need to keep up on is Kahlil Shakir. They have a lot of weapons in Buffalo. Maybe nobody stands out right now, but Shakir looked really good down the stretch last season. And this past week in the preseason, he looked good once again. Shakir caught all 3 of his targets for 28 yards, and while that's not a big performance, it was one of the better performances among all of the wide receivers. He was out there early, he was out there often, and he looks like he's going to be cemented as one of the slot pieces in this year's offense. Him and Curtis Samuel could bump back and forth a little bit out of that position. That's the one thing we're going to have to keep our eye on. How about we stay in Buffalo and talk about the potential RB2 there? Frank Gore Jr. His dad played for the Bills, and now he's playing for the Bills. And he also looked good as a guy doing lots of different things out of the backfield. He ran for 21 yards on 7 attempts, and he also caught 3 of his 4 targets for 16 yards. Doing a little bit of both out of the backfield, and James Cook looks to be a top producer once again this year. But if there's a guy that's going to be backing him up, as of right now, Frank Gore Jr. could absolutely be in line to take take that backup role. Bucky Irving has gotten a lot of shout over the last couple of weeks at camp. It sounds like the Tampa Bay Bucks really like how they could utilize him in their offense. And this week, we saw a part of that as well. 28 rush yards on 6 attempts. Not bad, but he did end up scoring a touchdown as well. Rachaad White, who was super inefficient last season and propped up by a lot of volume, could be in trouble if Bucky Irving continues to put up numbers that would solidify his place on the field as the backup running back or even as a change of pace guy. You've already heard me bring up Germaine Burton's name quite a bit this offseason. I love his big play potential inside this Bengals offense, and he showcased it this past week. He caught 3 of his 4 targets for 82 yards and a touchdown. Burton is really fighting to be that slot receiver this season, or potentially playing on the outside a little bit as well if T. Higgins were to miss any time. He definitely fits well in this offense and has the big play ability to put up some massive games. The targets may not be there at the beginning of the season, but at some point this year, he could start to make more of an impact. It wasn't really the volume this week that showed off what Davion Wicks can do for Green Bay. It was one play. 1 target, 1 reception, 65 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Now, over the past week, the reports out of training camp seem to suggest that Romeo Doubs will be the wide receiver 1 for the Green Bay Packers, but Davion Wicks could end up being the big play guy, especially if Christian Watson continues to get hurt. He had all of this work this offseason to try and figure out these hamstring injuries and try to stay healthier in 2024. And then we don't even make it to week 1 of the preseason, and he was already on the ground with an injury this past week. Definitely something to keep an eye on. Volume is going to be really tough to figure out for Green Bay on a weekly basis. This is a good team, but they have a lot of guys at the wide receiver position that are like a tier B, tier C type of player. They don't have those top tier guys, so there's nobody that really just sticks out as the number 1. Someone may emerge this season. Wicks could end up being the big play guy though. And speaking of big plays, what about A.T. Perry out of New Orleans? 4 targets, 4 receptions, 85 receiving yards. And over the past week, a lot of positive reports about him in camp as well. A guy that could really stretch the field and give a deep play threat for Derek Carr all season long. They've got a few guys on this team that can go deep, including Rashid Shaheed. So it will be interesting to see how this wide receiver core plays out into the regular season. But A.T. Perry right now is getting a lot of love, and he showcased some of that game-breaking speed and big playability this past week. And I would really love for the New Orleans Saints to figure out their big play guys, because I don't want it to be Chris Olave. I would rather Chris Olave play in the slot and start to see more of a CeeDee Lamb type role, where he's going to have big plays, but he's not a field stretcher. Now, based on the snap percentages, it does feel like Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine are still going to be the 1-2 punch in this Broncos offense. But Jalil McLaughlin could break into that snap percentage really quickly. This past week, he ran for 30 yards on 7 attempts. He caught all 3 of his targets for 26 yards, and he showcased why he could be a running back that can do anything in this offense. Jalil McLaughlin can run the football. He can break big plays on the ground. He can catch the football, and he'll get in there and he'll pass block just as well as a lot of other running backs. Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams may still be the lead backs as of right now, but McLaughlin feels like he's a Sean Payton type of guy. And at some point this season, if he's not happy with Perine or Williams, McLaughlin could end up seeing more and more touches as we get later into the year. Rookie tight ends are always really tough to gauge, but Ben Sinnott from the Washington Commanders looked really good this past week. He caught all 3 of his targets for 53 yards, and he stretched the field and showed his big playmaking ability from the get-go. But he's got Zach Ertz in front of him right now, and it will be interesting to see whether or not Ertz makes an impact this season to begin, and Sinnott starts to take some of those touches away from him if they go to a little bit more 12 personnel and have 2 tight ends on the field, or if they do some other things to make sure Sinnott is getting more looks than what Ertz gets. We could see a lot of splitting to begin with, but this all could be based on Zach Ertz's health and whether or not he stays on the field all season. If he does, he could hamper the progression of Ben Sinnott to begin his career, but that doesn't mean he won't be super solid in the next year or two. In Headliner Nation, just like everything training camp and preseason, sometimes you got to take everything you hear and see with a grain of salt. A lot of these guys had performances that weren't up against the #1 players from the other team. A lot of these guys had performances because they were given an extra look, because maybe actually people are worried about them making the cut and they need to get a little bit better look at them before they make that decision. But that doesn't mean that we still shouldn't be paying attention to these performances, because at some point this year we may see these type of performances in regular season games, and if that happens, fantasy viability becomes something that we need to be putting on our roster right away. And we'll keep you updated all preseason long. We'll keep working on the draft guide and updating that all the way until week 1. But Headliner Nation, hopefully this video gave you a little bit something to think about, and maybe there's some risers out there that we need to continue to watch. But for now, I'm gonna get out of here. Make sure y'all hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notifications. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.